Thus I have heard. At one time, the Blessed One was dwelling in the royal domain of Vulture Creek Mountain with a great gathering of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One was absorbed in the samadhi of the many aspects of phenomena called profound appearance. At the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, looking at the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, saw the five skandhas in their natural emptiness. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, "How should a son of a lineage trained who wishes to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom?" Thus he spoke, and the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva answered the Venerable Shariputra with these words: "Shariputra, those men and women of a lineage who wish to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom should look at it like this. The five skandhas should be seen purely in their natural emptiness. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form also is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, recognition, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, like this, all phenomena are emptiness, and having no characteristics, they are unborn and unceasing. They are not impure or pure. They neither decrease nor increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no recognition, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no sensation, no phenomenon. There is no quality of sight, and so on, until no quality of mind and no quality of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no exhaustion of ignorance, and so on, up to no old age and death, and no exhaustion of old age and death. In the same way, there is no suffering, no origin, no ending, and no path. No wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide by means of the profound perfection of wisdom. And since their minds have no obscurations, they have no fear. Transcending falsity, they attain nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell on the three times have relied upon the perfection of wisdom, and have become true and complete Buddhas of unsurpassable, perfect, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the profound perfection of wisdom, the mantra of insight, The unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, a mantra which calms all suffering, should be known as truth, for it is not deceptive. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, this is how a Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom. And the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and said to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, noble Avalokiteshvara, that he had spoken well. Well done, O son of the lineage, it is so. O son of the lineage, since it is just so, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced just as you have taught, and the Tathagatas will also rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, the Venerable Sharadmati Putra and noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva and the entire gathering, as well as worldly beings, gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed
사주 조원 대나 소원 도저 첨부 대신 도저 정 조제 대로 보다 나로 배전 조비 보다 어디서 야래 신로 주로 소원 사보 도미 예니 나주 조대 뒤에 대다 조비 세상 거선 는 야chen shubi jina sowa de yayan yubi shunji dudu dawa drapa jibi kujo je sanje kunyo kaba yase su sama davi jina sowa de shiru dami choma ade sha kadang dimbi mebo年就那些过去说那说，嘎达那么那说的，我这是的自己做个，我到这边我说的做的，到我这边到不给住的，要是就把这那说的。教唆觉得老妈多节康拉康的些年之中，说到天母母主正在之前老妈能拿说让就说到一个那大爷，也让他把这边中求，在这边到现在把也。现在新年到了，说我的，叫我养到老，这边去这边了，去去，找到那就也得找着呢，我就唱给我源头就上街去当出去就能。上九波多大愿叫做解，大愿去去之别所难解，若了平时上界诸佛说上界去，所界诸难了，上九波多大愿叫做解，大愿去去之别所难解，若了平时上界诸佛说上界去。所见诸难那上诸波多多念诸所见，大愿去去之别所难见，若来平时上见诸波修。哎呀，다가 저 통다 받을게. 다가도 비 남아서기 사제 나게지. 아니 통다니라 샤와니 소바노 예예. 통마킹노 줘봐게. 가서 거들 와서. 얘는 뭐 거기도 와. 얘는 뭐 생도 와.
Okay, that's good. All this need party 가셔 봐. 네 고스 rum시 송유 자선 고스. 마랑 봐 시에 가지 시에 되시니. Every day just as a Kadamba tradition goes, whenever we are receiving the teachings or engaging in spiritual practices, there are two things that are required, or it is important, that one in the beginning and one at the end. At this particular time that we are beginning of our receiving of the teachings, so therefore it is important to set our motivations to receive the teachings.
다가서 강도 기능 제사기네 되네. 내가 투병 벌라. 아니 가서 나리 집에 남아 저기 거. 랑 된게 나가 조지 신진 바지.
So to cultivate appropriate motivations in the beginning to receive the teachings, one must first visualize Buddha Shakyamuni in front of oneself at the level of one's forehead, surrounded by all those root and lineage gurus of Lam Rim.
나중에 로봇에니 랑게 전체 파마집에 타입이 선제 타제다 랑게 로봇인 거지.
So we ourselves is then imagining oneself being in their presence, surrounded by all sentient beings, including one's parents and so forth.
다 대다 로봇 속에 대한들 라인에 얘들이 대바 투명 보기 다 가져라는 집에 남아가지고 되더라. 근데 라지 선제 타제다 라인에 조베 선제 고반 타바 제게 대이치대 얘는 얘들이 많이 주제되는 요새 이제 마다 네바도 되어 왔지.
So important motivation that one need to cultivate at this point is to my very purpose of receiving these teachings, Dharma teachings today, is to gain state of enlightenment for the benefit of all mother sentient beings. It is for that purpose I'm here today to receive the teachings. So with this, following these instructions that I've given earlier, and we'll take 2 to 3 minutes to meditate.
아야, 당가 저게 네 된리기 기노 치바 영아. 얘네 가슴 버셔 있잖아. 상조란지는 바스.
With this appropriate motivation, appropriate motivations, one is then receiving the teachings on the great deities on the stages of the path to enlightenment, Lam Rim Chimo.
뒤쪽에 나리 치면데 토마송에 대바 투병 뭐. 대내에 야가지 벤두. 대내에 배제. 가자다 배제 로자와 저기 주주. 아니 되게 레발은 장물로 정화 집에서 아니 랑게 전체 짜이나 봐도 아니 저기 리바 많이 아니 봐 나냐 잖아 사부 로신로기 주마치가 냐는게지.
So this teaching that we are receiving today, which is the great deities on the stages of the path to enlightenment, can be traced back to the actual teacher himself, the Buddha Shakyamuni, and then Buddha Shakyamuni, and transmitted these teachings to the great Indian masters. Then these teachings are translated into Tibetan by the great Tibetan translators and Lotsawa, which is then studied and practiced by Lama Tsongkhapa and transmitted to his students, Lama Tsongkhapa's followers, all the way to one's own root guru. So therefore, the blessings of the lineage of these teachings is unbroken. So we are receiving such a blessed, immaculate teachings of the Buddha today.
배역의 미식이 팀모마이 바레서 러난 등인지 지로와 가르잖아 라라마 요의 니 샹추여디가 매주 소송이 배주 가서 단 로송단에 교육이 받은 아디샤 배는시 아니 다 배역 강정이 줘라니 사업하다 자체와 많이 뒤잔데서 고고 말해 아니 조선의 배비기 하루 지에서네 야 소하다 받네 니 샹추를 요마도 송와로 아니 대긴 제받다는 샹추를 했죠.
좀이게 송제 체도도 어디 바로 먹고 치에서
ngài thà nhẹ quỳ làm gì, tại vì sao, đúng không?
나 소름시.
ngài chú sáng chú làm đấy chứ mà xem chỗ cái người khát thuốc sinh ấy, số nó đã bị chế chế rồi, cái đến là đến trong bao nhiêu đấy là đã.
So this teachings of Changshu Lamgir Rinpoche, which is the great teachings on the stages of the path to enlightenment, that it is available and accessible to us. It is due to the kindness of the great Tibetan kings, the Dharma kings.
대다게는 조지 바디 아디스탈라니. 그래서 외지게는靠近的 디산에서 안부 뒤보당 되는 인산에 사업하다 자초 말해.
아니 rumchegi chedodo da
ya ngi anjo ko de nya
laso rumchi ne di rumchi sung chedodo ya di para de I can't hear Rumchi very clearly, so Rumchi is gonna go and get his headsets, okay? His earphones. Yeah, somehow it's keep breaking in the middle, so I just can't hear him very clearly.
Yeah, it was like that also. With
yeah. That's all saying that, man.
That's all.
Again, sense
No, that's it.
No. 당연히 되는다. 나중에 때로 변한 사람의 시에도 상주의 거는 지매당 가지 매주 소송진 조선단에 조지 받은 아데서 변는 데서.
So it is you can hear, right? Is that okay? Everyone here? Okay. So these teachings are as given by the great Indian master, first Atisha Divam Karashiyachana, who was invited by the two brothers of Halama Jangchu Wei and Yeshi Wei.
아니 된적이 먼저 로서 땅바라 되네. 아니 가서 배워 강제 정이 뒤산데서 한번 아니 매바다 되는 인산에 자도 서바는 가서 뒤산데시 보고 말해. 소 생을 베비 주지 니 소로에서 소아다발라 되네. 아니 상주를 하지 좀 손바로.
So as they requested Atisha to give the teachings by requesting Atisha that if you confer or if you bestow us a teachings, the Dharma teachings, or something that is very profound and very vast, then it may not be the Tibetans, the followers may not be able to understand due to their low faculty. It is therefore I request you to give us the teachings that can transform our mind, that can beneficial for our minds. It is therefore Adisha has granted these teachings of great deities on the stages of the path to enlightenment.
야, 인자네 추디 치와라 시에데 아니 센디 토소 템베 달란데 치와 생게데 아니 투모만 임베지요라.
So this is very exclusive teachings, when you look at the teachings as this, go through the stages of this particular teaching, it's directly, taming our mind. It is conveniently, advised how to train our mind, how to transform our mind, in other words.
되지. 다음은 로인다. 인자네 영어로 좀 받지 않는 지금 손이 비거라. 아니 상주 런지 좀 숨어버데 내 숨어버인스 손이로.
That's what I'm saying. Guess on that,
상주 상주 영어로 좀 받지 않는 지금 손 비거라. 아니 런지 지금 숨어버데 런지 숨어버인스네. 이 런지 되데 런지 지문이 지በ지በ이면 손이로.
So Atisha's lamp or path to enlightenment and the great deities on the stages of path to enlightenment by Lama Tsongkhapa are very similar. It is identical, almost identical. So therefore, it is said that whoever is teaching the lamp or the path to enlightenment is teaching the great deities on the stages of the path to enlightenment, and vice versa.
나도 저다 영어로 좀 받지 않는 조지 구지인의 손으로 송정열을.
And then we also have a saying that Lama Tsongkhapa is said to be the reincarnation of Pandanatisha, Atisha Divam Karashirichana as well.
되게 사진이 맞추지 저와들은 그렇지. 아니 사진 손바들라 아니 저와니다 비추는 게 해체다 시골세대 나속이 다들 기능 주는 로던지.
So with this, our first outlines or the parts is covered. The greatness of the authors given in order to show that the teaching has immaculate sources and so forth. So now we are on the third part, which is the right way to teach and right way to listen to Dhamma.
사제 제바데 란지서 자이사 네 가사 네 저니도 주는 시 제다시 이름 봐. 너무 가사 뭔지 제다치 이름 봐서 디장 거지. 너무 제 이름 봐서 이제 자이 사제 제디 당에 거기에 가서 예마서 하게 돼 체대 체그래다. 란제의 체내 쟁여 속에 인지미지 사제 로고에 대해 너무 그만하지 샤게를라다.
So it is a Lam Rim teachers, the tradition of the great Lam Rim teachers, that whenever we are receiving the teachings from the Lam Rim, one must receive the teachings of the Lam Rim by memorizing those outlines or the major parts, such as the first part that is, the greatness of the authors given in order to show that the teaching has an immaculate source and so forth.
당가 사진을 러시아고 근데는 남방고 지나면 제 이름발에 니 란저 자와 신이 되비스다 대나로 지다장 이름바 니지 다 도무지사 대나로 지다장 이름발에 니리 대 님보는 비시 그와다 님보 지다는 비치 니지 다 도무지사 다 님보는 지다는 비치 되는 아니리 나지 나자랑 님보지와 다 님보는 뭐리 다 동부다 다 님보는 증거들라 소리 주부 총회다 대모에 나제려만 양선인지 이건 제다 대모에 나제려만 양선인 주부 챔피언 나제려만 양선인 제지 당가도 사지 자이 용고이 사지 속에 사지 제바 이 주부 챔피언 나제려만 양선인 지카둘라 니 다달해도 여러 와서라.
So we are on the chapter of the stages of the path for the person of the great capacity. So this is the chapter we are in right now.
teach. That you be chimney long journey by Nelson into the Lazai such a jerry. Teach you go. Sorry, teaching you got up a second one. Said it to the sent in a shable of Sage. Not over this. That's said it to the such a jerry. And then Joe Java, San Jamiba. GBC chokazo zeje. Ta San Jamiba de la Yaniri. Niri. Ne Kasa 가사 냐베 조체베 전에서에 제레 메마데바 아니 야세 쇼알라 유종라 때네 아니 가사 다제냐 주고는 상주 산장지 니잖아네 어쩌다 다제냐 주고는 상주 산장지 가도 여러 와서라
As we are on the particular chapter of this, how to develop bodhicitta. So when it comes to the teachings of the how to develop bodhicitta, there are two different instructions, as we all are familiar with. One is the instructions in accordance with the Atisha's instructions, which is instructions on the cultivation of bodhicitta, instruction on cultivating seven cause and effect, and the Shanti Deva's instructions on the exchanging self with others, the cultivation of bodhicitta, exchanging self with others. So we are second, following the second advice, which is exchanging self with others.
되지. 당아서 다 사제 개인 사제랑 맞서는데 다 다시 여주고는 상주 생기면은 네 다시 여주고는 상 가서 다시 생장비 편에다 맞아비 님이 아니 장나 제니가 된바 네 강신 거세네 네 맞아 가서 다 강신 거지 세그라 다 그 강신 거세네 네 맞아 냐네 가르쳐 그래서 사제 될래요 다 다시 여주고는 상주지 세대 냐네 자와이나 가르쳐 그래서
So as we have gone through this, what is the disadvantages of not engaging in the practice of exchanging and equalizing self with others, and what is the benefits of engaging in such practice, and how to engage in actual meditation on the practice of developing bodhicitta based on the instructions of exchanging and equalizing self with others.
되지. 예 다시 여주고는 상주기 세대 가담be 라마 쪽에 아니 고되라 아니 수치마도 로시마도 수치 차면 좋아. 아니 게이션에 가담be 체크하네 해지네 수치 차도 와. 인자는 나로 쪽에 랑게 로를 뽑아도 배도 로이 세례 개고여서나 야 소대 마시 전력원은 연례를 자셔나요. 가서 소소를 되어로 와. 다시 제여로 와.
So this practice of exchanging and equalizing self with developing the bodhicitta, exchanging self with others, is held to be a secret during the Kadamba master's time in Tibet. It was not given this teaching was not, actually given to a general public. Rather, it is only to the suitable followers who's prepared to be able to engage in such practice. So after Geshe Chekawa, one of the great Kadamba masters, Geshe Chekawa, from his time onwards, then this teachings of exchanging self with other is given to a general public. So therefore, here, I would also like to encourage that when we are going through such instructions, if you think this is something that is not, your mind is not inclined towards such practice, and you should rather, focus on, practicing bodhicitta based on 7 cause and effect instructions rather than exchanging self with others.
되지. 맞아. 그 고하고로 때는 다시 제바 생기데 간데 제모로고를 세요디 장 제반 zem바다 신 예와 도바니도 로 제모로에로. 다때 소소기 카랑로로네 그 투사데 투사 말이 냐네 투나 간데 요사데세는 다제제는 다때 소저 로이를 메쳐가지 요거야나 야 다제 제로 맞아 고사 제세지 이거로.
So here, when speaking about exchanging self with others, we're certainly speaking about how to, how we can really exchange our way of thinking, how we can transform our way of thinking. Normally, we have this self-cherishing mind and cherishing for one's own welfare of one's own self, and we have attitude of neglecting the welfare of other beings. So here now, when speaking about engaging and exchanging practice of engaging in self with exchanging self with others, is to now to reverse this too. Instead of cherishing the welfare of oneself, one must cherish the welfare of other sentient beings by neglecting this cherishing of welfare of one's own self. So when you think about those practices, it's something that really becomes something that you feel that you are not inclined towards such practice, and it is something that is not really suitable for one's own esteem of being, then one should then analyze carefully and see how you can really, switch your practice to the one that is cause in the seven cause and effect.
되지. 될래 내가 예사라 가족이 쉬우 되니 맞아르마도 다다 가서 가족이 쉬운주기는 아니 상해 담바 시바 샤생 지지된 소아 아니 가서 로자 지지마 이게 랑탐바게 되는 상해 달래 바쇼생이 요아 저슬 다윤디 때스야 가사라니 이게 딱그 개체뭐 인사로 나죠 그 나죠 배죠 동아래다.
So here now, we also, we have gone through that earlier during our teachings last time. It is there's a secret teachings, the mentioning of the secrecy, the teachings that needs to be, practiced secretly. And then also we will a similar phrase that we will also find in the 8 verses of the Training the Mind by Geshe Tamba, by saying that one must, adopt such practice secretly. So the reason why they are just the teachers are actually emphasizing on why we should engage in such practice secretly is to really to see yourself whether you are suitable enough to engage in such a practice, and you yourself is we know ourselves whether we ourselves is a suitable vessel for engaging in such a practice.
야, 내가 치셔도 다다 다시 내주고 로장세도 또 로장이 걸어로 와. 로장 걸어 좀 장세 뭔가 돼야 돼. 되네 큰 용어로.
So particularly when speaking about engaging in practice of exchanging and equalizing self with others, is actually, these practices are actually coming from the lojong practice. It is the training of the mind.
됐지. 당가 수준의 로고이다. 내려게 가스페네 도나 생에 되는 게 가스 될래요. 아주디 타타될. 도나 랑진진 이게 대화라면 다시 현재 동에 되는데 가서 주버 샤워 생에 제도와. 대중에 로상들의 제자에 대한 소리도 하게.
왜 지메르를 도나 랑이 대화를 믿어봐. 신경이
네.
그거죠, 세대.
네. 대지로로 네. 대지로로지다.
That's all. So here we are on this paragraph of this chapter, the page number 53, the last paragraph, I think. So it is from, it says, so Rinpoche is, reviewing the last sentence of the fourth chapter, the fourth paragraph. So it's in brief, this statement means that you remove others' suffering while disregarding your own happiness. So there are two obstacles to training in this attitude of exchanging self and others.
nga so shong chu shong de lo de ne ro shong ge ta ma ge dong jo de ya na do na ya na de na sing ge de ji shong ge dong si de cha ta ma de li yong go de la da de ne ge la da jie xia xia wa yin na ni san da dong tie ge ro.
So whenever we go through this, the text that you will see at the end of the chapter, or at the end of the one chapter or the one specific chapters, you will always see or the summarized statement, either it's just to summarize or you will see in brief or in conclusion and so forth.
De ji nga so de da ga di ne ne chu da ga zo mo de mo cha la ma chi mo de wo ro ran ni jin ji ge ba kin ju go se ji ji ran ni jin ji ge ba kin ju go ma na jin ji de kin ji she se ge de ni ge san na do ne ji se san na do da kan de yong go re de kan de yong ya re se.
So as most of us are familiar with the text Lama Chepa, right? It is particularly the reviewing the stages on the path, Shinsho Dampa, reviewing the stages on the path, which is part of Lama Chepa text, where it states there's one particular verse which emphasizes on the practice of exchanging self with others by saying that since the cherishing ourselves is a since the cherishing of ourselves is a doorway to a torment, right? And well, cherishing our mothers is the foundation of all that is good. So we seek your blessing to make our core practice the yoga of exchanging self of others.
De ji da dun zhi ge da shi je bi lo de ran ji le je ba la ni lo de xiang wa le ge le ni ye de song do lo de ran ji le je bi ge de la.
So
De
here
lo do.
it's clearly mentioned that when one is engaging in such practice of exchanging self with others, there are main two obstacles, right? It says there are two obstacles to training in this attitude of exchanging self and others.
Ta ge lo ge da ni lo de xiang wa na ge ne ni de se ran dang xian je de du ge ten da dang xian ni hong se da so so war ri si je ne zhu ban zhen jin de na de la ten bi de du de ne nga yong yin be zhu ban se wa xia wo de ne xian je yin be nyang ne ye wa do be de yin nian bo ne song do ta nga zu ge ji de ro wa lo le cha dang.
So let's go through the text here. It says, you make categorical differentiations between people who are happy or suffering, yourself and others, making them as different as blue and yellow. Then you accomplish your happiness and remove your suffering because you think of them as a mine, and you neglect others' happiness and suffering because you think of them as a belonging to others.
De ji nga zu ge je ka do ka bo de ma bo se de be de so so wa ro ri si jie xian di go wa ro ni de na ye da da xian se de ri de ri de na ge ri si jie de di ge ma re so ye de ro.
So here, when it comes to the color, blue and yellow, it is appropriate and it is completely relevant to make a distinction between the two. It's a different colors. There are different colors, yellow and blue. But when it comes to the self and others, we can make a distinction as we make a distinction between blue and yellow.
De ji ka re se na ka bo de ran xin se de ji da so na ka do ka bo de ka bo so na ne ge re ni ran de xian se ge de ka sa se de ji da na ran de xian cha ge mi do wa ro wa ka tu xie xian de da do ne de ge do.
For instance, the white or the blue color, if whoever is looked at or whoever is seeing the blue color, it will always be seen by the person the blue color as a blue color and yellow as a yellow. But when it comes to the self and others, it is completely different. We cannot
Huh?
compare self and other to the difference between distinction between blue and yellow.
다 든주게 리스제네 따능이기 니보들 상나 가르 동거르서나 대이 니보네 세데레 당에 로긴다.
So,
대이 니보네서 다다신 원이 소소 리스체바 메데스 펜시 때네 다랑 제주 로제라 제랑 다게 로제비 세데 파르드 츠르제노 소데레잖아.
so there it says, therefore, again on the text, we're reading through the text, okay? Therefore, the remedy for this is not to make a categorical distinction between self and others as being essentially different. Rather, understand that self and others are mutually dependent, such that when you are aware of self, you are aware of others.
말로징이다. 고대부도
That's all.
파르 츠르제노 베나세도아 베나사 파르는 데이 원에 말에 원들이 원에 파이 파르로 제양사 파르 시나 안에 츠르 제노 데나 수도 게데바도 로차데
Lots of items.
예.
So then it says, and when you are aware of others, you are aware of self, and it is like being aware of near mountains and the distant mountains. For example, relative to your being here, you think of a mountain there in the distance as being a distant mountain.
데나스 대양 동사대서 데나 호불라 호비 카도 슬라 대장 호부니 로제이 카도 전제 로메제와 먼저오 송도 메제와도 먼저오.
So, for example, it's relative to your being here, and you think of the mountain there is a distance, being distant mountain and so forth. And yet, when you go to this distance mountain, you think of it as a near mountain. So that aware of self and other is not like the aware of color for regardless of what color blue is related to. You are aware of subject blue, are not aware of someone some other colors.
대다양 로딜레 된다 지바는 게 정면다 대다양 로딜레스 다신년이 공시베 상추선의 템버주 다다신이 되버데 파르 츠르 지신 준 모델 랑게 파르미 강라테네 츠른주 다니 랑게 마주나 강라테네 젠든주르 시에 되살라 되네 자바장 인제 랑게 모주바 메바 송소 소데데.
So there here, it says, moreover, Shantideva's compendium of training states, by becoming accustomed to the quality of self and others, equality of self and others, the spirit of enlightenment becomes firm. Self and other are interdependent. Like this side and the other side of a river, like this side and other side of the river, they are false. Other bank is not in itself others. In relation to someone else, it is this bank. Similarly, self does not exist in its own right. In relation to someone else, it is other. So thus, Shantideva indicates that self and others are merely posited in relation to the particular reference point and do not essentially exist.
된다대로 카도에 소소와 나기 말에 파르드 츠르나기래서 다다 신생이.
So now, distinction between the self and other is not a distinction between the two different colors. It is like other side and this side. The distinction of the self and others are similar to the distinction between others, that side and this side.
되지. 다가서 파르드 츠르세베 타니데 되제 임바세보세 장로와. 파쇼세데 땡겨오면 랑쇼 가쇼여서는 대 파쇼 자그리 랑쇼데 추쇼 자그로와.
So when it comes to this side and that side, it does not really essentially exists by its own side. This side and that side depends upon where you are. If you are staying this side, and you would say this side, and then that side, you make a distinction to that. If you go to the other side, then that side becomes a this side to you, and then that other side becomes a that side. So you can't say there is a one pinpoint this side and that side is existed intrinsically.
땅 되는 가서 계시시는 가서 녀다이 저저 관계신데 저저 다이 가서 관계신으로 쟤도 의비내서 이 코로나기 때문에 쟤에서나 가사설로 되는 쟤에 그러마도 쟤 지마로 차도로.
So similarly, when it comes to the self and others, the self and other does not exist intrinsically by its own right. Does not exist its own side, because when I look at you, I see you as a others and see myself as a me. But when you look at me as others and self and then you look at yourself as a self. So if the self and others exist intrinsically, or its own exists independently by its own right, so then self should be existed as a self, or is seen by the self, regardless of whoever is looked at it.
단다 파르 나의 신세대 단다 되게랑 라만 주요 말에서데 뎀바 주무주 계셔면서 지템비 롱을 되나요 라한테 신세 된자 매바데 하고도.
So here now, if you think very carefully of self and others, not existing self and others by its own right, it's not something that we're just following the philosophical tenets or something. We're not really talking about here the selflessness, or we're not talking about emptiness and so forth. But even think very carefully and in a realistic way, in a practical way, there is no such self and others that exists by its own right.
내가 가르치고서는 로지 야당을 때는 자치고 쉬우진 전들이마도 이거비네질 처럼 다랑데 처럼 말해다스 얘처럼 신라기도 왔어 계제대로 처럼 롱을 쉬우정보 쉬우지는 나 나세데 쉬우정보 쉬우지 자치면 전거야면도 저거는 다가랑 레미도 왔어 이대로 저기서나.
So if you
되는 가도 지기로는 처럼 랑 쉬우지 다 인생 같이 처럼 신래도 하러나 캔서도 지차로.
So now here, if such self that exists as it appears to ourselves intrinsically, and it exists by its own right, then it should be existed as a self to anyone, whoever perceives it, whoever the self is appeared to, it should be exist as a self. However, it's not so. When you are looked by someone else, you are not a self. Someone else is perceiving you as other, and then only that due to our own strong habituation or clinging to a self as exists by its own right, that actually force us to grasp onto it as a self that exists by its own right.
근데 저는 가서 개모성이 되시나 나 다 이바당 제 이바디 제 이바 땅에다 마와로 로다 이바데 소소지고 마든 건지 제고 제 이바데 사실 선전에 건지 미호수 줘봐 이제 제세라고 저런 제세는 건지 제쇼 저런 저저 마와 열세서나 저런 거랑 인생의 저저처럼 마도 물러나.
So here now, let's think about it. When we think about self, we ourselves is the only one who think about self, isn't it? But I, for example, I think about myself. I here, and then I am, and I self, and myself. But then it is perceived by all other people other than yourself consider you as an other. So if you were to compare yourself, and who is more looking at you as a self or others, then of course certainly the number of individuals who's looking at you as other is greater, isn't it?
Tendrye tachi kanche chedu, any patient and somba na hine, yang so in no jebede dona, Senji la pemba with Jensana to and do, Mendu. Tamasuki, Tandapoli Chensho, the Loyi Langa none, Roa, Loyi Chetachi none and Sonadroa. The region of Sanji la Carapegudu, Sendo Carapegudu, Saja Carachegudu, Senda Deji Caratingudu, no jebede dongroa.
So it is due to this misunderstanding or the misperceiving of things and events. We haven't been able to being an adventure on the right path. So therefore now we just take our time and contemplate and think very carefully, analyze very carefully what is the right and what is wrong. What is the right perception and what is the wrong perception? How the wrong perception coming into being, and how can we really eliminate the wrong perception by cultivating a right perception?
다 게 동부다 게 니바데 게 니바데 게 니도 게 니도는 지데 아니 현재 동해 양아를 누구 말어 게 현재 동해 가르치는 세거리 세대리 내가 수사 세세보 용으로 와
So then another obstacle, normally when we engaging in the practice of, exchanging self with others, is that, why should I exchange self with others? Because the other suffering doesn't really harm me. It is not harmful to me at all. I don't really care about what is happening to others because that is their suffering, but it doesn't harm me at all. So that's the one thing that is happening to us, even though we're not directly saying it, but this is how we, that is dormantly exists. This is kind of mental attitude. It dormantly exists within our stream of being.
단다 디노게 게니 소샹게 돼 맞아 배는 안다고지 추바냐서이나 다다케바지게 추바데 아사 가리제는 용어도 세체로 대노게 나정은지 제고로 그래서 다시 녀지 란지를 제비 로게 나사데가 모여기게 나사데 가려래샤세디 아니 내내래샤스는 신주가 켜바이 냥냥이 돈을送줘로
So this is the great practitioners have advised us and written those texts based on their own experiences. Just like a great, experienced physicians can diagnose the sicknesses of the individual, such as if someone is suffering from jaundice and so on and so forth. That the experienced, physician can unmistakably, pinpoint the sickness of the individual. Similarly, what kind of obstacles and what kinds of, impediment for, practicing self in others. So they're just it's just pinpointing the obstacles and then, impediments for our practicing of, exchanging self with others.
리스트에 야 상제 상주 선거 예된 임바제는 아주 초바제는 용나세 계시 시고 말어 리스트에 라니 카랑로로네 나를 들이지 두더면도 년들이 따그 두더면도 세대 신주제로
So it is always advised to look inward, and instead of looking outside, one must look inside. Withdraw your mind inward and try to examine yourself.
그 다치 제거 빼면서 개념으로 리스트에 내가 손을 영해들이 로아 소소를 영해들어
This is very, very important. We have this intellect to examine ourselves, how we can abandon this obstacles that are obstructing us from engaging in such practice.
배자는 아주 신화라고 지는 전전에 고라지는 로는 야 세찬의 주면 되게 신화의 고라지는 늘 제정도 거라 로 세찬의 되면 되지
So just like if you are roaming only in a very thick forest, so you're unable to get a sunlight, because it's not the problem with the sun or the problem with yourself, but it is that you are not actually going out of this thick, densely covered, forest, so you're not getting the sunlight.
개니반은 봐도 가만 주치지 바사자면 아바 있었어.
So let's take a 10 minutes break.
lo je bu je zhu je ne do zhong zhi zhou ni ji ni de jin bo ni sang je xian du min de bi zhuo ge nang de xian na zhe bo zhu ye dang gu zhe zhen min zhe la ga de yan da ya 야, 나가 좀 메티는 로인다.
So let's continue our teachings.
야. 나가서 주인이 받은 게 막 로인다. 게니 받았어 그러. 게니 받았어.
Also. So
제
just
양 제주선도.
also.
양 제주도 네지 달면에베 대세유 된도 멤베 도냐비 게세와 네 손도 될 게니 받.
So the next obstacle for practice of exchanging self with others is here. It's clearly mentioned in the text itself by saying that you must remove the obstacles of thinking that I will not make an effort to dispel others' suffering because others' suffering does not harm me.
근데 전에 그게 진짜와데 제주 가서 제주 dal ne go mare seguro dal se na ngasu yi ta kan ji zu ko de gi ne ta la shen ji de du gi ta ne go maro wa shen ji de du ji gi rang gi ne go mare da rang gi de du le shen de wa me pa maro wa ya
So it is true, it's generally the suffering, the other's suffering, does not really harm us. That is true. However, it is not to say that our happiness and suffering is not related to others, not dependent upon others.
ngasu ji ka ra ha ko go se so na ro wa pe na ama ji le bu za chi mo shu je so na ama ji ji ka ra lo go re nga na bu na ba le nga na na ga se yin de pe ye na za de pe rang ji gi ta da rang le na le se ye se wa le ye wa
Let's take an example of a mother whose only son is, critically ill. And then mother will have such a genuine aspiration to take the pain of her only child's pain upon herself, voluntarily.
shenji donghe ki rangi la mane na yang shenji donghe de rangi la len yi lo da le de ren duwa san jeda nge ta de ga se pe shi ba
So this is a general example that I'm setting because although that others' suffering does not harm us at all, right? At the same time, we have such an ability to mentally accept the suffering of other beings.
ta nge pe sha kono ki ta wana de ju ki ge de la ni ni bo kan de den ge de se na nga su ki ge de le chen dong ge wa ta me su ki chu chen dong so na de la pa nga su ne ji ji dong ge wa ne ji de kan de dong ge se la wa ye na
So how do we really apply antidotes towards such obstacles?
de ta na chara ge se to che wa ye na de ta na se de ni ge bi se dong domre donghewa done jembitse nosoba meba jete gebi donghe ji eni jambala minebi sharo se jije
So here, so another example, it's a beautiful example that is stated in the text itself. So let's go through it, okay? It says, it would be like not accumulating wealth in your youth, out of fear of suffering in your old age, because you think that your suffering in old age does not harm you in your youth.
ande ro menebi jinse sanji shena ani tanda chero ye gengo chabe kola kange moyme tanda la tanda kale jogo maro kari chena gengo jobi kale kola chero neje tanda de chichiro
So then this is, what you're saying is now, it is not, if you think in that way, so if you do not, it is not necessary for one to put an effort and accumulate wealth by thinking about by thinking that you will be benefited by the whatever the wealth that you have accumulated right now, because the suffering of old age does not really affect you at this point.
Let's say okay, the church is the same as Maria, same could be jinset.
Oh, sure.
Jenju donge same could be jinset, Charangi, Nala Nugumunduas and Lagudo, Master Chenny Baji Kessana, Charangi, Jinseshiva, the Jinsayada Marison, Nijitan.
If one is a Buddhist philosopher, and such reasoning is not not a valid reasonings, because saying that you cannot, it is so others' suffering does not harm oneself. So therefore, it is not relevant to engage in the practice of exchanging self with others. So because other suffering does not harm me at all. So this is the reasoning. I mean, this is not a valid reasoning in accordance with the Buddhist philosophers.
Tejendo was in Joloda. Tejendo, Combi Dongayan, Labe, the Sewa Jede, Jen Shero, Jeson Sondo.
So then it says, or as studied. Or as started in engaging in the bodhisattva's deeds, it would be like not alleviating the pain in your foot with your hand, because your foot is not others. Not your foot is others, other, and old age and youth, or the similarly former and the future lives.
Nasuke kamba na kudu sena ene lapi kamba na kamba yene de lapi ki se go marawa ene kambi na sa de lapa le nugu mendo ji je se katu.
So why, here the reason is that when you are having a pain on your leg, and we use our hand to alleviate the pain from the pain that is the pain that is going through your leg, right? So we're using our hands. But if you think in this, if you apply the reason, the previous reason, then because the pain on your leg doesn't really harm your hands, why use your hand to alleviate the pain of your leg?
Gyunshe da jewa ngase tsunpa zang yinji ene nyema nga ten dang nga ten re nga zho dang shu zho so la ya zha ro song do ko den ri ri ba dang na ta ya ba ji ya do.
So then it says our old age and youth, or this youth, or similarly former and future lives. It says are just illustration. This principle applies also to morning and evenings, former and later days, and so forth.
Techi, tanda nga tsu puku chung chung lopya doye chungche la gengo yunpe kange me chube tanda lega cheba de sidu roa, ranglu se che yongda roa. Da jewa nga se kenlinge jing, zanda jewa shima penche la, dibo munyo tanda la, mege jibon chichung la somba ya, te yang, jewa nga se kenlinge jing keshi she na, yang lega che do roa. Cherang se do jen, tasa kanga che gugu ma re, tete ti nego de la cherang la tsu jen nego ma roa sa la, ka do.
So if we keep on following that the reasoning, the previous reasoning that is written by that other debaters or the arguers, because they argue that because the other suffering, it is not relevant to engage in practice of exchanging self with others, because the other suffering doesn't harm you. So if this is the case, then we all know that we are engaging we are putting rigorous effort on accumulating the wealth for during the youth to benefit in our old age. So including going to schools and putting all your efforts to studies and receiving the educations. It is all for your, thinking about your future life, right? Your future. So, so this is the one thing that we all know, that we are engaging and putting an effort to do something right now, which will which will then benefit in our future, right? Similarly, if you are if you accept the life after death, then we're engaging in all sort of virtuous deeds of 10 virtuous deeds, such as engaging and observing the ethical conducts and so forth for the future lives. So if we really follow your reasonings, then your reasoning really becomes unrelevant. It is not relevant for observing, engaging in such actions of benefiting one's future life and one's past life and so on.
되지. 아니 녀망 고다 칼라서에 된다를 쇼기 칼레저 먹고 하다 아니 산지 쇼기 사비 된다를 바고 다리 제거고 말이 와서 해서 타야버지 자야도 손도와.
So there are a lot of other reasonings then which will then which will become a negation for your reasonings, because we are putting an effort to do something in the morning for your dinner, right? So you're doing something tonight for your tomorrow morning's breakfast. So this is how it works, and there are a lot of unending reasonings will become will negate your reasonings.
다텔로 도바 제제 텔 도바데 데다 가서 가가 카도 다다 가도 도바 좋아지네 도바 사위로 와. 일단 지는 다그 말에 베네 메신다 지기 나를 내면에 계시셔야 돼 가로 하시다 저항하시 계시셔야 되다 지는 다그 말에서는 니 도저등 예바도 요거로 와. 이게 도저세기도 와 단다데 니바다.
So that this reasoning is actually really help us to understand, why we're engaging in what is the purpose and reason of engaging in exchanging self practice of exchanging self with others, because we have all kind of doubts that other suffering will not harm me, and then my cherishing for the welfare of others just by thinking it's not going to help them, and so on and so forth. So in order to clear the doubt or the speculation of such practice, then you find all those reasonings. All those reasonings will really help to clear your doubt.
다른 속에 당연해지고는 로자스디 봐 아무 신도 넣고 나주 신도 넣어보기 로이 대장에 들어와 나도 지 세와 경험이 현재 개체물에서 돼요 그 상주시 지용하게 장제 들어와 다다데 로이 제 정황이 자데 그 지체 做지체 되는도
This particular practice of developing bodhicitta requires very sharp faculty. It really requires a sharp faculty. It also requires intellectual exercise by understanding all those reasonings, because this practice is particularly given for the individual who has a very sharp faculty.
변한 가서 다들 두고 예매세도 예되는 제제되는 제다 간절을 세야 나긴게 ranche panzebi 진지게 로기 차단 가르를 가진 증거를 거기 제단데 제생하다 레도 무도세 로를 신주 제거로
Just as we examine how this grasping at self is apprehending on this independent self, or the self that exists by its own right, in and of itself, and one will able to find that when one is able to apply a remedy towards grasping at self-grasping mind, to eliminate the grasping at self. Similarly, by understanding the object of apprehension of the grasping of self. Okay. And similarly, when it comes to the rangchizin, or the self-cherishing mind, how the self-cherishing mind is cherishing cherishing self, and what is the more of apprehension, the object of apprehension of this of self-cherishing mind. How can we really, what kind of remedy that needs to be applied towards elevation of the self-cherishing mind?
당에 단지게 도주의 로위다 도보 연주 동로데 아니 게테사 게테 근전 지지인바 아니 강라 초바 레 초바 지인베 장진이다 메라오냐나 아세 도바테리
So here one to that clears our doubt here in the text where it says column, but old age and youth are one continuum, and foot and hand are one collection. So therefore, they are not the same as self and other.
네, 가서 얘네 얘로자 얘로자 시송소 선도하게 되는 뒤제다
대신도 강배 동에 라베 미세베 규제 신이 비치로세 디레베
시마 시송소 제니 견신세 되는 말
견신도 개왕하지 좀
어데
시마 우리 디다게 로차빈 바름지
알레 로차베 어데 다오드소 시소 자로 아니 게데스
시소 자로세 게데 견신 규제는 강라선이
어데데 도저 있지
남나스 어디 로비 나오는
텔로네 테레 데 가서이나 체지 받아서이나 쪼방세 그래 파주 가서 로네지 제여디 유족이 쪼바달라 쪼네자요 와
So this is in accordance in the monastic debaters. So this is a challenge where you are actually answering to the debater who is the questioners, who is actually asking a question. So you're answering to the your partner debaters question.
디제 정으로 제기 신호선으로 같이 잡아 아니 같이 가서 같이 가봐 랑로 잡아 쪼바 방was 쪼방 있으더라도 인조
So kachikapa, which is negating the other's standpoint, and ranglu shapa, establishing the one's own standpoint, and sabapa, eliminating the dispute between the two.
아야 다다되게 같이 연주 도발홍에 되라 아니 랭카도 줘서 당가스마 로드 로기다 대 지바로 그세에 아니 저랑이 되가라 아니 알레 누구 말에 디제센스 제거서나 아니 저랑이 저왕 하시 말에 하셔도 쉬고 아니 정하셔다 아니 하루 쉬로기 다리 제거고 면도와 세기다라 대대 지바 말에 아니 저 가르사 아니 세대도 체메세에 지지바로 왔어 아니 네 감바다 네 라바세에 초바지 내려 된다고 말했어 라우스와라다
So this is what it says, but old age and youth are one continuum, right? It says, and the foot and hand are one collection. It says, therefore, they are not the same as self and others. That is with others, standpoint.
yeah,
So we will then be by answering the question to this particular question.
준단 초반에 계지 뭐고 초반제다 근데 뭐벌라 따바 인지 장장병원에 매라 매라지 근데 장게 다다 장게 다다 신제 다장 초지 대다는 조급에 다다 신라 되는 잡아 장 미미 장게 뭐주바 매바 매도 손도 되시原장 손도 다 알레 되바도 지로로지다
So in response to that question, here it says, the continuum and collection are designated to many movements and to many parts, right? They do not have a self-sufficient essence. The self of yourself and the self of others must be deposited to a collection and continuum. So self and other are not established by way of an essence that they can be posited independently.
다 던져져다게 다 가서 계시셔야 되는데 제다에는 가는 수속이 쭉 강조바데 하나 주의기 되는 쪽으로 하나 소비되는 쪽으로 와 소바데 진 가로를 맞대봐 수속이 쭉 줘도 말해.
So here now, if you take example of phenomena, everything that exists, all those phenomena, we can possess those. We can be possessed those collection, those phenomena, either to a collection or the continuum, without possessing a collection or the continuum. We cannot establish any phenomena.
변화 시바 생기도 제소나 시바세도 계징하시기 차전전의 요구 시바 아니 주쟁이 쳐도서니 차대 차전 제라 되제 있잖아 로고도.
So now if you think about the form, the phenomena that is formless, such as consciousness. Consciousness can be established by depending upon its own continuity, or the momentary existence of those consciousness. Similarly, when it comes to the phenomena that are not consciousness, such as form and so forth, are established by depending upon the collections or the parts in a whole. So without speaking about the parts in a whole, parts in a whole or the collections, we cannot really establish the form, the phenomena called form.
다가서 타투는 계시셔서는 시바 타투서는 계지 참여 잘하고 그래. 로아 주제지 주소기 주지 계시셔 타투는 시서는 쇼지 참여 잘하고 올라다. 제 준의 제 소이나. 대바도 투디 준의 조투고 말으려고 얘기해. 로아.
그래서 수초기 참여 잘했어.
주세대 쇼지 차제 참여 쇼지 차 잠을 두겠지. 아니 시바도 뒤지 뒤게지 하시기. 신의 참여가 레어디 아니 시바 뒤지 참여다 뒤지 쇼지 참여 생기데 참여게 타투사들을 다나가서 소바데 주인께 시서나.
그래서
조투고 말해서 라바친 거.
그래서 제라마 시자를 버리지.
안데 시바 뒤지 참여. 다가서 시바 예서나 시바들 시도 차이 시바를 해비가라요. 깨지 참여게 차투. 인데바데 제라마 시자래다고 무비네슬 내도고도. 주제기 저 파지 차지 뭐 고소하이나.
Also, so if we really analyze very carefully, then we will come to a conclusion. We need to really go through the critical analysis of one's own, consciousness, and then consciousness become a timeless. It will when you really touches the actual, the subtlemost consciousness, and it become a timeless, which is a timeless. We cannot really, say this is the time of certain existence of our consciousness and so forth. Similarly, when we go through the critical analysis of phenomena other than consciousness, then this will become a chogichami, which is a directional list. There's lack of directions. We cannot say this is this particular phenomena existed in certain directions. We cannot talk about the direction in terms of such, the very subtlemost phenomena.
텔레 그런 게 진료바 면제 계시잖아. 제디 참는 거는 저소는 진조 못통해. 아니 시발을 끼지 참는 거는 저소는 시비기 진도 좀 못통해. 차도야지 차로 그랬어라.
So if you really go through the critical analysis, and then you will come to a point that you cannot really establish a continual of consciousness. Similarly, if you go through a critical analysis of a phenomena other than consciousness, such as form and so forth, if you go through the critical analysis, and then when it gets to the subtle point of this phenomena, then this will also become the continual list.
되게 내가 제시 가르치고서는 진 생에달라 기증하셔 참고에 돈을 떼어내면 진 대리세는 저쪽 두야지다. 야 차제 초바세에 차시 먹어질래 떼어내 자데마도 대리세는 그 용해지지. 매와 인자는 저런게 초진이다. 아니 초바래데 진리 생에데 아니 이제 되는 짜제 동선은 언제 두야 가버려서 몇 토록을 세로 소리지래.
So it is clearly stated that if you really think about and analyze very carefully of the collection, we talk about the collections. How can we really, pinpoint the collection, whatever the phenomenon that maybe it is collection of four elements and then four constituents and so on and so forth. We can't really, if you really teased out all those collections, we can't really pinpoint this is the collection of this and that. We can't really pinpoint. Similarly, if you go through the critical analysis of your own consciousness, this will be the same thing, that you can't really pinpoint that this is the continuity of my consciousness and so on and so forth. We can't, even in other words, that when you really go through the critical analysis of everything, that at the final analysis, the collection that you think that exists by its own right will then scattered, and it will break into pieces, and then even if you go through the individual pieces, you will not be able to find the actual collections and so forth.
내가 저 계시 시행들이 배나가 저 다른 계시 시행하에나 배나가 저기 잠불리게 뇌지 연수 줘봐도 찌똥로로 그러와 잠불리게 뇌지 연수 줘봐 찌똥네 아니 연주 가서 되게 뇌지의 차이 제진지여라 다 제진 된다는 제비 갈라베 대체 참모는 거는 저 뉴그에지지도 된주제나 갈래 라바지 제 시에요디 이게 제진의 대레서는 저것도 못 통했지 하나 도매 자료에서는 자료다.
So this is like how our universe coming into being. So if you think about the universe, the forming, the evolution of the universe, it is all the collection of the atoms, molecules, and subtle substances and so on and so forth. But if you really go through the critical analysis of the actual forming of this universe, breaking through all those, space particles and so on and so forth. And then you will get to the atoms. And then if you go further, then everything becomes unfindable. So there's not a thing that can be pinpointed as a independent existence of the substances that actually becomes as actual atoms or the subtle particles which forms the universe and so forth.
된주지 가서 가서 되게 계시지게 되게 계시지도도 배는 잠불리데 파치 똥로디 거라 배데 나가 똥바 대신 종화라바 변연의 중치장지 맞아 매비 거라 아니 된주데 수용조 가르치는 류거에서 얘기 레드 세리바서 뺄래져 가고 제거로도 연주 수뇌는 연주 라바 차야지로 또그 뒤지게 농도 보는 중화의 영수 좀 매고 차로가 아니 된주 거지라 아니 연주 So
then also I have seen one of the Gishi was speaking about that once when the universe, the gross universe is coming into extinct, in other words, dissolutions, and it was called completely dissolved, and then mere spaces exist. Only the spaces existed. Right? So then again, within the sphere of the space, within the sphere of this space, how those, the gross level of forms and, can be collected, can be formed. So when you ask such questions to the scientist, he was the Kichila mentioned that it is quite difficult for even the scientists to answer this question.
다 가서게 남비 중에 시외데 뇌지 제대로 지지 스제니가 데 마다베 스제 레왕이 중화래 세데 지 이제 저서 저 급이 소리지 레정하게 되버리 마도시 지세시 시사메비 소리 다지 이제 대 셰바보 켈레고는 이제 셰바보기 소아레셀라나 난 이제 셰바보 코로나양 가려 용을 써야 되지 대체 뭔가 저게 마다베니 지지 스제니가 이제 되게 델레테 빌레레 되는 쇼를 써야 돼 이제 되는 저나 So
then here, when it comes to such questions, the Buddhists would always answer this question is our dissolution of this nature, which means which literally means environment and then sentient being within this environment. In other words, the universe and the sentient beings within the universe are coming into end. Going through the dissolution is due to its own cause, due to its own karma, and also coming then also the evolution of this, the universe, and how the forming of the universe is coming into being due to its own karma, and all the sentient beings and the karma of sentient beings and so forth. And then those individuals who accept Jebapu, which is the creator, then they might say this is created by the creator, right? The mighty God created the existence, and mighty God is the one who created this, going through the dissolution of this, universe and so forth. So it is not really easy to answer, when it comes to the continuum and the collections, there's nothing that we can be pinpointed. This is as a collections. There's nothing can be pinpointed as this is as a continuum. It's a very, very, difficult answer. It's difficult to answer to such questions. So this collection, in brief, the collection and then continuum can be explained by understanding, by support of idea of the supporting idea of those dependent originations, the interdependency. So, for example, let's think about ourselves. We as ordinary beings, we are constantly, engaging in and fulfill our desire by the 5 desire objects, isn't it? Our needs are fulfilled by the 5 desire objects. And that's when speaking about the 5 desire objects are not really produced by oneself. The 5 desire objects, the very 5 desire objects that fulfill your wishes are really dependent upon others. So this can all be established only by depending upon the continuum and in collections. But just, we can only explain and establish such things by depending upon them, by going through the explanation of continuum and collections. Other than that, we can't really pinpoint this is that and this is this without, having a collections or the continuum.
되지. 단도 텔레 디기 텐데 라바데 산나동에 소나 아니 상녀세대 대리를 되는자 대리세는 상녀를 되는자 거에 단진하기로 다대 신자 거에 진생이 돼요. 로아 아니 계진 하말데 계지 심하자 거에 아니 라발레 때는 주포스는 용수도 버자 거에 아니 그 차전자는 가서 차전 줘벌 차실레 때는 차전 줘고 인산 되지지 마도 장빙원의 주버 지야 맞아 세유디 아니 소바의 진생이야 지 차랑이 산책 가려서는 좋아니바 파동하고 있었지도.
So this is all those, it requires for us to have a proper understanding of what is meant by dependent originations or the interdependencies, right? Because without having such ideas, it is really hard for us to actually establish or to establish continuum and the collections, right? Because let's take an example of a very gross level of dependent originations, such as today and tomorrow. The very tomorrow that is yet to become is heavily dependent upon today, isn't it? Similarly, the first moment, existence of the first moment, dependent upon the existence of the second moment. The second moment, very coming into being, the second moment that is yet to become is heavily dependent upon the first moment. So similarly, when it comes to Chechen and Cheshe, which is the parts in a whole, the parts dependent upon the whole and wholes dependent upon part. It is therefore this becomes parts and this becomes whole. Without having a part that cannot be a whole, without having a whole, how can the part exist? So this is how complex when it comes to the explanation of dependent originations.
되지. 단도데 라니 제번제세데 라니 짜치면 제모다 라니 다던 진생이 되게 과다 해그 말이다. 라니 제번제생이 돼 때때기 토노는 내지 요에도. 근데 때때 참목이 랑건을 주바 여 말에서 장지 레면도. 나는 지대 타녀를 되비기 되지 계시시나요? 저랑이 랑 찍고서 집어 연하상 zem바나기 지다 면도다 세제레모도. nemba 주무도 계시 마시나. 그러와.
So if you think about the self-cherishing mind, here we are talking about this, since the cherishing of ourselves is the doorway to all torment that we talked about earlier. Even without thinking about that, without touching the subtle interdependency, without touching that subtle interdependent, even if you think about our day-to-day existence in our own experience, think about it. If you really think about it yourself alone, is it really relevant to us to cherish ourselves? Will it really make us happy just to cherish ourselves? So if you really, analyze very carefully and think very carefully, and cherishing one's own self, self that existed by its own side, it's not really relevant at all.
맞아 계시는 천하게 잘라도 된대도 자치면 된 거지 레면도 세지라. 된대 자치면 지대 레면도 세지.
So just like we think about if you have an ordinary object that is holding, and then you hold into it as a very precious, but then when someone realizes this is not really precious, that is not worthwhile to really cherish, very strongly cherished, you better let go of it.
근데 제바데스 제거만도 되는데다. 배는 가서 로와 배는 니라다 잠도 남의 것도 또 오래다 란치들려 말와. 란치적인 진지데 당전에 쳔바긴지다 간절해서야 돼. 신주 제가 뺏겠지 뭐.
So now here, one critical point here one need to understand. is the difference of the object of apprehension, the object of apprehension of the grasping of self and object of apprehension of the self-cherishing mind. So this, it is need to be one need to make a distinction between the two objects: object of apprehension of self-grasping mind and object of apprehension of the self-cherishing mind. So one must make a distinction, because here let's talk about the Nyeran Dachumba, which is the arhats of Pratyeka Buddha and arhats of the Shervaka. They, although they abandon the grasping of self, they already negated the grasping of self of phenomena, but they haven't been able to sever it. They haven't been able to, alleviate it. They haven't alleviated the self-cherishing mind. The object of self-cherishing mind still exists in their perception. So this is, we need to make a distinction between the two.
This be nyanga chimbo yoro be na dansi be de zawa de cheba pansa de ni rani shi yin la keba la soba la nyamba ja do ro rang jin jin ni sen ka rang jin ji le ba shu ne dene ne shangju sanje shangju samba de da gi ni da sen ko gi da yin na de gi chu ji da de ne ni che da da rang jin yin ga gi da ta xin de se ne je ne ni shi yin ya hang gu do.
So this is fine in the text by saying that, because when such arhats, or the Pratyeka Buddha and Sherpakas, when they become arhats and they engage in meditative equipoise in the Xueying, with the sphere of peace, within the sphere of peace for eons and eons, when they are actually, abandon those grasping of self, and observing themselves into the peaceful state of their mind, and not really coming out of their meditative equipoise, by enjoying themselves, single-pointedly observing in the sphere of peace, Xueying, the sphere of peace. So therefore, at some point, they will hear a sound by saying that you must, come out of your meditative equipoise, because you haven't been able to actually, fulfill the welfare of your own self as well as that of other sentient beings. If you want to fulfill the wishes of your own side and work for the welfare of your own side and that of other sentient beings, you must come out of this meditative equipoise.
Nima tes loye chilasa, tema loge nage.
Also,
Tanda de tada me ye tes chilasa. Me jansa, thoma meba ne, jinzi gombe wange rangi donghen jongwa la, meje ba yinbe. Yen la wang jinzi kona deyi donghen la wang, meje ba jewa yen la sondo.
so, which is going through the reading of the text again here. It says, however, since beginningless time, you have found your own suffering unbearable because you have been conditioned to self-cherishing. Therefore, if you become conditioned to cherishing of others, cherishing others, you will give rise to an attitude of finding others' suffering unbearable.
가생에 라이바 가서 세만한테는 로아 고나 하고 문제 된 거에 대한 가요 많이 있어야 돼. 로데 공비 제한테送거로 와.
So, as I have mentioned during our previous teachings, quoting from the Pramana Vertika, by saying that whichever that is the object of knowledge that is to be known can be known by familiarizing yourself with this particular object. There's no such object that cannot be understood with, if you put in effort to familiarize yourself with this particular object. Because our mind needs to take a time really to familiarize with certain object. When you really want to understand, the mind really wants to understand that the particular object.
다 제반제 세디 가보 제바대로와 로유 르메토네 로유 사치문 제바대로와.
So self-cherishing mind, self-cherishing is here now. Cherishing is that you can't let go of yourself, right? You're completely cherishing that, so you can't just let go of itself, right?
계속 장으로 이제 소우도아 베네로 가서 로 손주지 되는지라 상주생라 공용디 아니 뇌지 당전에도 통도도 소우도아 예세대 타도가 사치문 제세대로와.
So therefore, His Holiness has mentioned, several of his teachings by saying that when one engages in the practice of the bodhicitta, the development of bodhicitta, by saying that I myself, meditate on the bodhicitta for last 30 to 40 years, at some point you are able to see everything, everyone, all sentient beings as the one's dear to oneself. Everyone is dear to oneself. There's no discriminative feeling towards different beings, being someone as one's one close one and someone as one's enemy and so forth. Rather, one is able to adopt such an attitude of seeing all beings as dear to oneself.
그래서 가서 고메디 베드 용 시간을 지 가서 전화 얘기도 와. 자원인데 대 인사마로 공소나 자자자 용도 쓰고도 단답을 집에 담아들게 손에 단답 가서 처리한 것도 이제 라마 무슨 코로나 단답 용도 처럼 제시 손등에 이제 이게 다 라마 제연제여로.
So here now, it is almost when we really do not practice diligently, and when we talk about such practice, this practice really become impossible for oneself, right? But then if you really engage in the practice and familiarize yourself with such practice, then everything that is said explained in this particular text is possible. Therefore, the explanation that we find in the text is explained by someone who explained this practice through his own experiences, so through his own insight, right? Similarly, we also have a teacher, a master, who gained such experience in sharing his thought with us.
다들 당가서 심어도 다기녀지 건수 뭐세 사지 될래서 다 매지 도고 되자기 근데 저서 그래서 여기 돼서야 상이 공단이야 주소 거기 시작하는 정으로 이제 땡데 대비 손쳐도 와 그래서 하고 유지래.
So we'll stop here with this today, and we will resume from next paragraphs in our next teaching. And then also, I'm wondering that if you have time, His Holiness is giving the Gondar Warumje.
상이 공단이다. 다리 손 공단.
Oh, really? It's not easy.
아래 다리 전에 집어들어도 돼. 맞아 손이 공단 집.
His Holiness is giving teachings on
주소
praise to dependent originations at 9 o'clock. So if I'm wondering,
그 시작에 인사에게.
9:30 is what you said. 9:30. 안수 두서들 와름치 안수.
어저 돼서 그때 시작에 취소지 요월도 와 되니 니라도 와. 가서도 와 돼서 주종님 사금도. 이렇게 신이라나?
So 9:30 our time. So it's our time. So it is good to take your time in listen to his sermon.
그래서 카도 걸어 인치 돈은 달라면서 저는 인치 연구도 내 마시는 가시를 배우들 배우 연구도 길이 쏘쏘서 이게 배워던 거도
So there are different translations, many different languages. His Holiness teaching is translated, so you can choose the English translation. It's a simultaneous translation is going on. So.
당가서 홍화제에 된다. 가서 대리도 지선이 대리리기 개원 대기 준비 대손도 사비 개원나 아니 틀라테네 네 장시 선제 당시 되라이 다제년주고는 상주지 산장네 상주지 산은 뭐 저라진에 제네 조비 상주지 고반 요한인데 터버지제 터버는 네바데니 제 뉴나슈베 나마나지 장시 선제 당시 지라 상주지 산은 뭐 저라진에 제비 홍화다 말라제다 살라다.
So let's take our time to dedicate our mirrors towards attainment of one's own enlightenment for the benefit of other beings. Here, the virtue that I have accumulated in this 3 times, may I dedicate all my virtues, accumulation of virtues towards one's own enlightenment and that of other sentient beings. And may I complete and perfect my practice of developing bodhicitta, of exchanging and equalizing self with others. May this precious bodhicitta generated within myself and all other sentient beings, may all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the 10 directions bless me to be able to do such practice.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jay Rinpoche.
Good night.